Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So if you're following along last week, we were talking about how to use fresh leaves and how to dry and press them for your creative projects. And more importantly, we talked about how to treat these leaves. So you can see instead of a very fragile leaf, I have a leaf that I can basically bend almost in half and have it work in my creative projects. So today I wanted to show you an art journal page using Collage and a few other things to add these leaves into your creative projects, and more importantly, how we can continue to alter them to work better in your projects. So let's get started. I found this set of 49 and Market Curator's Meadow paper, and I love these patterns. For me, it's just so fun to have a few of these woodland creatures, some kind of vintage little bits and pieces. Also, the backs of these are really nice as well too, and so I just thought these would be perfect for adding collage and layers into my art journal. I also have some dictionary paper that I love to use just to add those extra little bits of collage and lettering onto my page. So this week my husband actually came home with some flowers for me. I thought this whole motif with the acorns and the leaves would be totally fun to add to our journaling page. And even the outer paper that came with it, I just love the leaves and the patterns. So I'm going to be using these as well in my art journal. And this is the thing, you can use almost anything that you find for your art journal. It doesn't have to be something you've pre-bought. You can do this very much on a budget, or you can buy designer paper. But I wanted to show you that you can use a little bit of both to create a beautiful background. And so for this one, I thought that somewhere on this, I'm going to eventually have maybe a piece like this. So what I'm going to do is take a few minutes and just fussy cut around the acorns. I'm not really wild about this, but I really liked this whole leaf bit that I wanted to add in. So I'm just going to use my scissors and cut that out. Because it's identical on the back as well, I can basically just cut the whole thing, and then I end up having two layers to work with. So now that I have fussy cut these out, I've left the plastic part on top that's clear, just because once we add it onto the surface, it's not going to matter. But then you can see that I now have an option for being able to decide which direction I want to go. Do I want this piece or this piece? And they're basically mirror images of each other, which gives me a little bit more options. And it's just a fun way you can use these collage pieces on your project. So that's probably going to go on more of a top layer, but I do have some of these other layers that I want to add first. So I'm going to start by adding in a little bit of the book paper. Book paper is a great way of adding a little bit of texture and a little bit of writing onto my page. I'm going to start by just adding it with a little bit of the regular gel semi-gloss. Because the paper is a little bit stronger, the semi-gloss will work a little bit better for this. Adding the book paper is just a nice way of adding a little bit of texture and interest to your page. And I tend to just rip them, add a little bit to the back of the page, and just add it on top of my background. And again, these aren't going to necessarily be focal images. It's just going to be a little bit of texture that's going to be peeking in here and there on my page. And that's kind of the beauty of collage, is it doesn't necessarily have to be super planned out. You don't necessarily have to have a really good idea of where it's going. You can just add it and then just see how it goes. Again, because this is all going to dry perfectly clear, it makes a really nice grounding layer on your page. Part of the reason I like wearing gloves is then I can just rub my hands over things, make sure things are really well sealed down. And again, these pieces don't have to be big, they can be quite small as well. Just always make sure that you add in a layer on the bottom, a layer on the back of it. You just want to make sure you have a really good seal on this. And I'm not even sure just how much I'm going to be adding to this page. And this is a page I haven't really planned out. I looked at it and I went, well, I want to do some collage. I want to add in some book paper and stuff. That's about as much thought as I've given it so far. And sometimes it's just a fun way of just creating. I feel like I've been doing a lot of things lately. I've started teaching classes locally, and you can even find some of my classes on Zoom if you'd like to attend an in-person class with me. But they've been great, but they've been a lot of planning, and they're very technique-based classes, so they've taken quite a bit of my time. So I really wanted this project to be something that was very loose and super fun, just to add layers and texture onto my page without necessarily having to put a lot of thought and effort into it. And sometimes that's where we're at with more art journaling. Sometimes we have ideas for great projects or techniques we want to learn, and sometimes we just want to play because we've had a lot going on in our lives, or we've had a really busy week. And this is just an opportunity just to let go a little bit and see what might come of it. And I tried to not have a lot of harsh lines, especially on these first background pieces. You'll notice as I go on, I might start cutting out things to be a little bit more focal images, and that's fine. That's a really great way of just adding in variation to your collage. So now I'm looking at these pieces that I have, and some of them I love the backs, but I also don't want to completely give up all the fun imagery that we have as well. So what I'm going to do is take out my scissors and choose a couple images that I do want to keep in this page. So with this one, I think what I'm actually going to do is just tear very gently along that edge. If you tear towards you, you end up with the white. If you tear away from you, and you end up with that really gentle edge to it. And so that one has a little bit of an edge, but I'm going to add it right there. And these papers are quite thick. You want to add quite a bit of gel medium to it just to make sure that it sticks down correctly. And I tend to pop these ones a little bit past the edge. And then when I put them a little bit past the edge, that allows me to come with my scissors and just clean up those edges instead of worrying about always getting them perfectly aligned or straight. So just want to continue to add these pieces on until you kind of cover up how much of the surface that you feel like covering up. And again, I always just try to tear the edges a little bit. If you like that white bit, leave it. If you don't necessarily have to. There's lots of options. You're not forced to do it one way or the other. It's up to your own preference and your own creative feelings on just how you want this page to turn out. Maybe with this one, I'm going to leave a couple of the edges really sharp, and I'm going to have a couple of them really torn. So we're going to see as we add new layers just kind of how that makes that look. I just love this piece here and that floral bit. And this is a great way of just keeping it a little bit more neutral, but then adding in little bits of color. And that's why I chose this particular paper brand, because I really liked the 49 Market for just the fact that this is meant to give it that sense of like nature and a very clean looking, very muted look to the collage paper for this collection. This is quite thick paper, so using a heavier gel medium is a good idea. If you're trying to put down paper, realize that the thicker the paper, the thicker the gel you want to use. For example, sometimes if I'm putting in really heavy paper, I'll use a heavy gel medium. For this one, gel medium seems to be working just fine. I can add the paper, but I'm not having to worry too much about it not sticking to the surface. You can know that you're not having quite the right gel if things just keep picking up and they're not sealing down to the surface. That means you need a heavier gel to use on top. I like using matte medium on things like tissue paper and napkins, but then on something like this is where I pull out my heavier gels. If you ever don't like how much white you have on the edges, you can always come in and just pull the paper a little bit more just to get rid of those really stark edges. You can really use really tiny pieces, you can use really big pieces. In some cases, sometimes it's nice just to collage with almost an entire page, which you could have also done with this. If you liked one of the pages just as it is, add in the whole page if that's what you're looking for, because these ones are almost collage pages in themselves. You could really just put that down on your art journal and do some other things around it, and that would be just as nice. I don't want to completely cover my mushroom, but I did really want to get at least part of those birds in there. And that's going to be hanging over the side, and I'm okay with that. I'll just cut off any excess and then use it just in another project. And again, I'm purposely leaving a couple strong edges there, and that's just fun for just mixing things up. Again, you may hate it, you might like it. It's up to you. Whatever you want to do, it's a personal preference. You can decide on how many edges you want. You could be really particular and just go very carefully along all these edges and just remove the paper so you have it almost a fussy cut look to it. I don't care that much. So I like it nice and loose because I just find that it kind of keeps it in that loose style that I like to use in my creative projects, because I just find that sometimes I can get too involved and too fussy about things. And so half of collage for me is going extremely loose and just really owning that looseness on those pages. So after you've added all your paper, just make sure that you don't have any areas that are coming up. And that's part of the reason I like wearing the gloves, because then I can go crazy with touching things and making sure everything's on. If you're not sure, you could always do just another entire layer across your surface. It isn't totally necessary. This is where you could also even go with a little bit of matte medium and just add it to your page and just see what happens. And if you are looking to use a lot of your glosses, the Glad Press and Seal works really well for protecting your mediums from air, and it makes it much easier to get the lids off of them. And so I just realized I forgot to add in my fun leaf paper. So I'm gonna add in a couple little spots of it just because I don't really want to be without that on this page. And so I'm just gonna go back in and just add in a little bit more layers onto this just so that I can add in these fun little shapes. Before I add in leaves and other things, what I want to do is try to have a little bit more cohesion to this piece. And that can be done by adding in a layer of color. So I'm going to add in a fairly deep color, but I'm going to add it in very thinly. So I have a little bit of raw umber here. I'm going to mix with a little bit of burnt sienna because I don't want it to be too dark, but I definitely do want to have a little bit of a deeper color to it. So I don't want all of my layers to have the exact same color, but I do want to mute this slightly. So what I'm doing here is basically I've taken just a couple drops of fluid acrylic. I'm just adding that across the page. I'm probably going to go in a little bit deeper with this, but you can see this by doing that has some spots that it rubs into, has other areas that it kind of sits more on top of, and that's just a really great way of just bringing a lot of cohesion to your page. And that just gives it that slightly muted look. This is a little gray for me. It's kind of more of a brownish gray. I want to add in a little bit more of the burnt sienna. I think that's just going to help it give it a little bit more pop. I might add in a little bit of nickel azul gold. That's going to give it a more of a yellowish tinge. Let's try by adding in a little bit more warmth there. I think I'm going to go with some nickel azul gold. The quinacridone nickel azul gold is a great color for washes, I find. I always tend to fall to it because it just gives such a beautiful color to my creative projects. So you can see there, it's a very warm fall gold color. I don't want to go completely yellow with this. So what I'm going to do is just add it in a few spots, and that warms up that brown paper as well. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go all in with this. I love that look. It's fantastic. I love this particular color, and I love just how it adds so much dimension and so much cohesion to my page. And if that's maybe a little bit much for you, you can always go in with a baby wipe. You can go in just with a paper towel and just wipe a little bit of it away. So if you ever feel like you've gone too far, this is an easy way of just pulling it back. Because you can always add in more layers, but once the layers are there, it can be a little bit harder to pull them back. And you just want to dry that just a little bit. And before I add in my next layer, I'm going to go in with an entire layer of matte medium across the entire page. This might seem a little bit counterintuitive at the moment, but what it does is adding in a layer of medium in between the other layers that you have. It's going to be very slight, but creating those isolation layers is going to give a little bit more depth to your piece. And it's also going to, again, bring in that cohesion. And you can do this with much thicker layers too. So you could do this with gel medium, you could do this with pouring medium, you could do this with leveling gel. It depends on just how many layers that you want. So now that this is dry, I want to add in something that's going to be really fun, which is micaceous iron oxide. And you'll notice from the label here, you can see it's a little bit shiny. It's also very rough. There is actually a lot of mica in this, so it does go on really interesting onto your page. And I'm going to go a little bit differently with this one. In this case, when I'm adding with a paintbrush, what we're doing is we're rubbing it into the surface. That went on a little bit stronger than I want it to, so I'm just going to spritz some water, and that's going to cause it to move. And then what that's going to do is all of those little rough spots, any spots that have a little bit more texture to it, it's going to go in between those spots. You can see it's kind of giving this fun, little bit aged look to it, but it also gives it a little bit of sparkle. And so this is even where you could go in with your finger and just find those crevices, find those spots that you really want that to stick out on. And then again, I can come in with my paper towel, and because I'm using a paper towel and not a brush, it's getting into all those crevices. So I'm not pulling up too much of it, but it's coming into some of those fun spots. I want to play around with a little bit of my little pieces here that I cut. Again, I'm trying to figure out which things I want to cover because I'm like, now I'm covering up things I really like, but that's okay. That's just the nature of adding in collage and adding lots of other things on top. So there we go. I'm going to add in that leaf bit underneath. You can see that by adding the matte medium to these, now they bend a bit, right? Like now you get bend to them. So instead of cracking, they become a little bit plasticized because that's basically what the gel medium is doing, is it's making it into a little bit of plastic because plastic is acrylic. And I think I want to put my 3 leaves there. But I do want this to stick out a little bit more from the background. So what I'm going to do is come in with just a tiny bit of gesso. And this area here that I want to put these leaves on, I want those to pop a bit more from the background. Right now they're fading in a little bit. So what I'll do is just basically take my brush, take my touch of gesso, and just gesso over this spot. Again, it's not going to cover up everything that I've put below, but it's going to add in just a brighter spot. That's going to draw your eye to that spot. And now if I add in my leaves, you're going to notice they're going to pop a little bit more from the surface. So I have that little bit of a background to kind of pop them up. Before I add these on, I want to add a little bit of this ear interference gold fine to the leaves themselves. So I'm going to grab a little piece of parchment paper here. I'm just going to dab off my paintbrush a bit. Again, you don't want a lot of water in your paintbrush, but you do want a little bit because this is going to help the paint to move more. You can see just by adding that. So I want to go even lighter with it. It needs to be more of a wash because I want it to grab the color, be a little bit more shiny than it already is. And that's just going to give it just that little bit of pop onto the page. And because we've already added the matte medium, instead of having these disintegrate, instead they're taking that color very, very well. And so they're just making them a little bit shinier. And that's just using just a tiny bit of iridescent paint with a little bit of water onto your surface. So you can see that the more acrylic I add, the more pliable these leaves are. And that's the beauty of the matte medium and just adding acrylic and other things on it, is it makes them stronger and it allows you to be able to do a lot more with them. And so I think I'm going to add in one more little thing to these because I love the color of them, but now they're a little bit all one color. So I think I want to go in with maybe a little bit of red. I'm using a Caran d'Ache New Color 1 pencil for this. And I'm just basically adding in those raised areas. I'm just using the side of my wax pastel and just adding in that tiny bit of color. So it's mostly just pulling out the veins. And that's just going to help that have that little bit more dimension that we want and being able to just make sure that we don't lose some of those textures and that really beautiful color. And this one I'm going a little bit more aggressively with it. So it is catching some of the areas in between, but I'm fine with that as well. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, if you could like and subscribe. By liking this video, that just helps more people see it. So thank you so much for your support. Caran d'Ache New Color 1s, they're like a water-resistant wax pastel. That means that this color will stay on top and it's going to work very nicely on this project. I'm going to come in with a little bit of the regular semi-gloss gel. When I'm adding things onto my page, I like to use a slightly thicker gel. It means I'm going to get a lot of great adhesion, and because these surfaces are a little bit bumpy, that's going to help it adhere a lot better. And what's nice about it too is it does create a tiny bit of dimension. And I love having this a little bit of dimension. I know I'm working in a book and sometimes that can be a little bit challenging, but I always love adding just a little bit of dimension to my pieces. By adding in that little bit of gold, adding the white in behind, now that's just popping from the page a little bit. And this piece here, I'm going to use a little bit of matte medium. I'm going to add it just straight onto my page here. That's the beauty of adding in with acrylic and other things, is that basically you can add matte medium and other acrylic mediums right on top and it isn't really a problem. Because this is plastic, it should be able to stick fairly well to the surface, so I'm not going to bother trying to get some underneath. Instead, I'm just going to try to adjust this a little bit and add some matte medium onto the top. And that's just going to help it just really have the same look. So even though the plastic had some shine, I do want this to be a little bit more cohesive, adding in the matte medium on top. You can see that when it was adjusting a little bit, it was pulling up. So you just want to make sure that you have that completely flat. But you can see, because it is semi-translucent, you can see a little bit of the color and everything behind. So that's kind of a nice addition to my creative journaling page here. And it is coming up a little bit around the leaf, but I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me. So I'm going to come back in here. I'm noticing that's lifting a little bit. And so sometimes what I like to do is just add in a little glob and then just use the paintbrush. Because again, this is all going to dry perfectly clear. So that's a way to make sure that you're getting the adhesion that you want and that these are going to not break off, but instead be just part of your journal page and look really, really nice. And this is almost where you could use a palette knife for this if you wanted to try to add in that nice thick layer. And so you can see you can do all sorts of things with these leaves. They don't have to stay their regular brown color, especially if you get ones that are as old as mine that have gone that really brown color. You can also add just paint and other things to it. And in this case, if I was going to do a background that was a little bit more white and I didn't do as many layers of wash on it, I would have maybe just left these the color that they were, but because they had kind of fallen into the background a little bit too much, that's why I ended up bringing up the color. And so sometimes that's just the nature of when you're playing around with mediums and you're playing around with washes and you're playing around with collage, is sometimes you need to kind of adjust as you go. And this page for sure, I basically went into it going, I want to add leaves and I want to add these types of pieces, but I didn't really have a vision for this. So I've had to adjust it even as I've been just filming here just to try to figure out what do I want and what do I want this to look like, and how am I going to make this end up the way that I really want it to be. So just finished off this page by just adding in gratitude and adding in my own writing about the things that I am grateful for. So I love fall, and it's one of my favorite times of year. I love how the colors of the leaves change. I love the beautiful blue skies and the bright sunshine. And I love going through walks through the forest this time of year. I find that the light's really interesting. You get lots of interesting colors, and you get so many fun leaves that you can bring home and add to your projects. And in Canada, we just had our Thanksgiving long weekend. And I always make a point during Thanksgiving to journal about all the things I'm grateful for. I feel like we have a choice of what we focus on. We can focus on what we don't have, or we can focus on all the blessings that we do have in our lives. I've been reading Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown, and she's had something very profound to say about gratitude. She had this passage from Robert Emmons that was in her book that I just love. It says, gratitude makes us appreciate the value of something, and when we appreciate the value of something, we extract more benefits from it. We're less likely to take it for granted. In effect, I think gratitude allows us to participate more in life. We notice the positives more, and that magnifies the pleasures you get from life. Instead of adapting to goodness, we celebrate goodness. We spend so much time watching things, movies, computer screens, sports, but with gratitude, we become greater participants in our lives as opposed to spectators. And I found this so profound. I love the idea that we're participating in life more when we choose gratitude. It allows us to celebrate the good in our lives. I know for myself, the more I focus on what I'm grateful for, the more content I am with life and what I have. So this page for me was a real opportunity to write down the things that I'm grateful for. And so my prompt for you, or my question for you this week is, what are you grateful for? What resonates in your life from this passage that I read from Brené Brown's book? I would love to hear your thoughts and see how you explore the topic of gratitude in your life. And I would just love for you to share some of your thoughts and what you've learned about gratitude. So I'm just going to add in a little bit of journaling and some of the phrases that I thought were really meaningful from the excerpt out of Brené Brown's book. So what I've put is, gratitude makes us appreciate the value of something, and it allows us to participate in our lives instead of being a spectator. And I love that, the idea that gratitude can just help us be engaged in our lives instead of just being on the sidelines looking in. So I know with a lot of my journal pages, I go quite light with my journaling, but in this case, I wanted it nice and bold. I wanted that strong black accent. So the nice thing about how we've done this page is we have the white in behind. It gives everything a little bit of that lighter feel. We have the black, which is the other side of the color wheel, and then just a bunch of other values and colors in between. And so you can see that by creating an art journal page like this, you can add collage, but it doesn't just have to be just the collage. You can add a lot of things on top and still have a pop. I think the biggest thing is you need to be able to adjust as you go, just to try to continue to have that contrast. And with my journaling, I just wrote on the leaves some of the things I'm thankful for. Just for a job I love, for having a wonderful family life, and just for my husband, for being able to have freedom, to have nature to spend time in, to have my garden. There are so many things I'm grateful for, and I think sometimes we can overlook the good things in our lives. So I just wanted to share with you some of the thoughts and some of the things that I've been learning about gratitude. And I hope that this will give you a place to jump off of as you write down the things that you are grateful for. And if you've enjoyed this video, again, if you could like, subscribe, and just hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you're interested in any of the supplies I used today, I've included all the links below. If you're looking for another video about collage and how to use collage in your art journal, click here. This is another video that I have done about collage in the art journal, but using more of a Christmas theme to that particular journal page. So I hope you'll check out that video, and I'll see you there.